Okay, so the second technique that we're going to talk about in today's live stream is a frame in a frame. Now, this is one of my favorite composition techniques, and if you've watched some of my videos, you'll know that I've covered this a couple of times so far, just because I think it's one of the most interesting and kind of fun techniques that you can use when you're making compositions. And one of the main things that you can do with a frame in a frame is to focus the viewer's attention. So let's have a look at a couple of examples of how I've used a frame in a frame in some of my images. Okay, so let's go back to the image that we were just looking at during the rule of thirds section of the live stream. So if you look again at this image, and I'm just going to make this bigger again so you can see it a bit clearer, and we jump to this, you can see this frame. Now, this is a literal frame. Now, obviously, it's a door frame, but actually, door frames and windows and any kind of man-made opening are a great way in which you can focus your viewer's attention. So, obviously, when you're taking pictures, you have the natural frame of the viewfinder. In my case, I shoot in the the horizontal format. Now, you might shoot square format photographs, but essentially, a frame in a frame is where you use other small frames in whichever form within the frame of your main photograph. And by using this simple technique, it draws your viewer's attention specifically to something that you want them to see within the frame. And in this picture, in particular, it's drawing your attention to that boy standing in the literal frame of the door frame in the doorway. Now, here in this image, let me bring this up a little bit larger so that you can see even more clear. This was an image, again, taken in one of the communities in central Jakarta. And in this image, you can see that there are a couple of very subtle frames. Now, sometimes frames aren't as obvious as being a doorway or a window. Now, here I'm using both the walls of these two buildings that are either side of each other and also using the top of the photograph to create this frame that subtly draws your attention in towards the cat. And then again, very subtly, if you look at the way the horizon in the background is reflected in the river, it creates that second little frame, which again draws your attention in towards the cat. So I'll just show you those again to show you again how subtle those frames are. And so you can take it into two extremes, really. You can go with the very obvious frames of the doorway, or you can start to play with lines and reflections, maybe even patterns that appear in nature to create your frames. And I'm going to come along to a couple of those examples to show you those a bit more and talk about that a bit more. But again, here in this image, this is one of my favorite images because it was just an amazing little moment. I saw this man peeking out of a window in a community along the northern shore of Jakarta. And you can see how just using the frame of the window, again, a very literal frame, it draws your attention right into him. And it was just a wonderful moment of him just peeking around and again, just capturing one eye as he peered at me through the camera. And I don't normally like images where people are looking at me. I like to capture very natural images, but this particular image was it was too good not to capture and include. Now, in this image, you can see it's quite clear that I used the frame in this wall. So this was an abandoned building that was not used anymore. And I was exploring these areas within Jakarta that had been damaged from flooding. And as I was exploring these areas, I was in this one abandoned building and I noticed these boys on the other side who were just sitting there looking at something off camera. And immediately this opportunity jumped out at me because of the frame created by this dilapidated old building just was perfect for the frame in a frame technique. And so they didn't notice me. thankfully, because again, that's another thing I always want to try to capture natural images. So I work very quietly, not moving too fast, not um, throwing my camera around or making too much noise, just trying to be subtle and slow but purposeful. And seeing this opportunity was again too good to pass up, because the perfect framing of the wall just drew me in, and I knew it would draw my viewers' attention in, and just again create this element of interest in the frame, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make images that are of interest to people, that make them stop, ponder, and draw them in to your photo. So you need to use composition as a way to draw your viewers' attention into the photograph and into the story that you're covering. Now, here I was in the mangroves of northern Jakarta, and we had all these trees. Now, we've been talking about man-made frames, but you can find frames in nature as well. And so here in the mangroves, these beautiful bent trees were um, all over the mangrove forest, and they were reflected in the water. And I noticed some fishermen who were fishing in the little ponds and lakes, and they were sometimes getting up and walking around. And so I positioned myself to capture these frames, and I literally just waited for one of the fishermen to walk into that space created by those trees. And so, yeah, I had all these opportunities, all these natural frames that were created by the trees. And I knew that all I had to do was pick my position, pick my spot, frame my image, and then just wait for one of these fishermen to walk into that space, and then press the shutter at the right moment. And that's what I did. But again, here's another. I'm always a bit of a perfectionist in terms of my compositions, and ideally, I really would have liked to have gotten someone in that other space on the other side, in that little circular space on the left-hand side of the photograph. If I'd got another fisherman in that frame, I would have had two people in two different frames, and that would have been really great. It didn't happen. The opportunity wasn't there. There was just one fisherman. I could have waited maybe longer for that opportunity to happen, but in that particular instance, it didn't happen. But even I'm quite tough on myself sometimes on my compositions, and I'm, as I said, a bit of a perfectionist. And if I could go back, sometimes I would, wait a little bit longer and see if I could get an even better composition, even stronger, more compelling composition. So just a review, tips for using frame in a frame. If you're out and about and you want to use this one, look out for the obvious man-made frames like doors and windows, or any openings in structures. And then the best thing to do is to pick your spot. So look at the situation, look at the frame, think where you can position yourself, pick your spot, frame the image. So look through your camera, look through the viewfinder, and simply wait for something interesting to happen within that frame. So it might be a fisherman walking past in the wetlands. It might be a bird flying past, and you capture the bird just in that right moment. It might be a person peeking out of the window, like in the image that I showed you. There are lots of different ways that you can use a frame in a frame, and if you can combine it with something like a really interesting moment, something passing into that frame, then you really increase your chances of making a really interesting and compelling photograph. All right, let's delve into some of your comments and questions. I think we have one or two that came in online before the live stream. This was from Uday, who I think might be in the comments right now. He said, I've got a question that's more about approach than technique. When starting a new story, do you typically walk around the location, noting potential compositions based on the time of day and light conditions, and then return to those locations for the right moment to capture your images? Or do you prefer to photograph what's immediately in front of you, taking things as they come? Great question. Well, actually, the answer is both of those. I do both of those. So normally, if I'm out and about in a new location or somewhere that I know I want to make a picture, I will go out and make notes about the area or the place that I'm in. So, for example, I might go to a place and I might look at a scene and think, well, if I come back during the golden hour in the afternoon, for example, the light might be coming this way, and I might be able to make the image that I want at that time that I can't make now. So you have to remember that with photography, everything is always changing. The light is always changing. The time of day of and the activity of people, for example, is always changing. So you can go to the same place at different times of the day and make completely different pictures. And I'm always thinking about this type of thing as a professional photographer. I'm thinking, well, actually, if I come back tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., it might be much busier and I might be able to get a group of people in this one position to make the image that I think is possible here in that situation. So I will do that. Yeah, literally, Uday, I will make a note and say, okay, I want to go back to this location at this time and to make this kind of photograph. But then on the other hand, as you said in the second part of your question, sometimes things just happen. And that's a real beauty about photography is that sometimes situations just appear. Sometimes you can't plan them. Sometimes you instinctually use a composition technique that you might have had buried in your brain for years that you haven't used. And it just kind of just comes out in that moment because that's the one that you instinctually have to use. And those are beautiful moments too. So it's a combination of those two, and you should embrace both of those approaches. The slightly more thoughtful one, where you're thinking about and planning a certain shot, but also embrace those instinctual moments that you can't plan for, because those are equally good and provide equally good opportunities for photographs. All right, let me dive into the live comments while we have a chance just to see who's joining us. Okay, we've got another question from 21 Virtues. How did you first get into National Geographic and how did it happen? Well, it's a bit of a long story, and I might have to cover that in another live stream. I have another video on my YouTube channel about how you can become a National Geographic photographer. And in that video, I kind of break down some of the 5 top things that photographers can do to become photographers with National Geographic, or to have their images published with National Geographic. I give you some tips, give you some advice, and also talk about my route into professional photography. But essentially, what I did, I was living out here in Asia, making stories from China. And I returned to Europe and attended some photography, photojournalism festivals. And I started to make contacts with people at National Geographic. I knew some of the photographers. I'd met some of the photographers. I'd intentionally gone to some of these festivals to meet photographers, to meet photo editors. So I was doing networking, and networking is incredibly important in our industry, as it is in most industries. And I started to get the attention of some of the photo editors because I was producing what was quite unique work about environmental issues in China specifically, but also wider Asia. So I had my niche as a photographer. And again, I've talked about this in some of my other YouTube videos about how you can find your niche in photography and how you can try to find your identity as a photographer and stand out. So I encourage you to go back to some of those videos and learn a little bit more about that. But basically, I found my niche. I identified the people who I needed to meet, the editors, the photographers, and then I got a foot in the door by showing them my work, showing them my portfolio, and finding opportunities to work with them. But that is another topic that I do want to actually go into a little bit more in some of my future videos and live streams. Okay, let's take one more here. That's from Guillermo, again, who is tuning in from Miami. Okay, thanks for tuning in, Guillermo. Lots of climate change related stories happening in Miami as well. Oh, and we've got one more. We've got Anne Taylor tuning in from the UK. Anne is also another former mentee. She just finished up my 3-month mentorship program, and Anne is, I'm very proud of Anne. She's doing some fantastic projects in the UK, documentary photography projects in the UK. So I've been helping Anne with her projects. So Anne, thanks for tuning in. Great to see you here.